Good morning, everyone. Please forgive the coughing. I'm just getting over a cold, and I still have a little bit of a cough hanging on, so I apologize now. Thank you for turning up this morning. I know that you're all probably very tired from an adventurous day yesterday, so we very much appreciate you coming and participating in our symposium. And of course, I'd like to thank Stephen very much for being very much the engine behind this symposium. So this morning I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the ICRC's current work and approach to the future in the Indo-Pacific region and beyond, related to the missing, catastrophes, and disaster victim identification. A little bit about the ICRC. The ICRC was founded in 1863. The ICRC was founded in 1863 by Henri Dunant, who was a Swiss businessman and philanthropist. What he envisioned was a neutral, impartial, and independent humanitarian organization able to provide action worldwide to protect and assist victims of war. The International Committee of the Red Cross is the source of international humanitarian law and is at the origin of the Geneva Conventions. And the ICRC is considered the guardian of the Geneva Conventions, the 4 conventions of 1949 and their 3 additional protocols. The ICRC forms part of the Red Cross movement. Also included in the movement are the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies and each national society in the world. Right now there are 186. These national societies include, for example, the Indian Red Cross, the Nepali Red Cross, the Pakistani Red Crescent, all the national societies around the world, together with the Federation and the ICRC, make up the Red Cross movement. And it's important to note that this is the largest voluntary organization in the world, and in total we equal more than 800 million members worldwide. The ICRC, acting globally, currently has over 80 operational delegations and with activities in over 100 countries, and we employ over 12,000 people globally. This map that you see is ever so slightly out of date, but it gives you an idea of the distribution of our offices. The activities of the ICRC, the 4 main components of the ICRC's activities include providing assistance for victims of armed conflict in the form of health care, ranging from primary health care all the way up to training on war surgery. Economic security, including providing in emergency situations food, hygiene items, and shelter, and in the post-conflict period, microeconomic initiatives to help civil society get back on its own feet. And water and habitat to ensure that people have housing and clean water. Prevention activities of the ICRC include promoting international humanitarian law, we are the guardians after all, as well as other preventative actions including mine and unexploded ordnance awareness programs worldwide. A very important component of the ICRC is cooperating with the movement. Our cooperation with the movement in general, but especially with individual national societies around the globe, is a huge part of our work, and it's very, very important to us. And we try to work in cooperation with national societies in a particular country whenever possible, because we are sister organizations in one movement. Also part of the ICRC's activities are protection of victims in times of war. That includes protection of the civilian population, repatriation and registration of prisoners of war, registration of political detainees, and as well as management of the dead and the search for the missing. And who are the missing? The missing are those persons whose families are without news of them and or are reported missing on the basis of reliable information owing to armed conflict or other armed violence. This can include, for example, this is not an exhaustive list, people who are forcibly displaced, whose whereabouts are currently unknown, places of secret detention, non-combatants killed during military operations where the bodies remain unidentified, combatants killed and missing in action, forced disappearances, executions, massacres, and secret disposal of bodies, as well as victims of catastrophe. And it's very important to note that the ICRC's definition of the missing is much more encompassing than the UN's definition of the missing, which focuses mainly on enforced disappearance. The UN must remain focused on justice. That is a core component of what they do. So their efforts on the missing are focused around those who have been forcibly disappeared and bringing those crimes to justice. The ICRC hopes to include a broader range of missing persons because to the families of missing persons, whether those persons are victims of forced disappearance or simply have become separated from their families, to those families who are waiting for their relatives, the pain is just as deep, it's just as enduring. So we try to include all families in our definition of the missing. So how did the ICRC get involved in the missing? Well, the ICRC has a very long history of what we call restoring family links, or RFL, and that is reuniting families separated by conflict, whether those family members are alive or dead. In many situations, our actions involve reuniting separated children. With the events of the 1980s, mostly in Latin America, and then the 1990s moving into the Balkans, more international attention was given to the problematic of missing persons, and there was a realization that unfortunately many of the missing were actually dead. Prior to this time, most international organizations, and including the ICRC's work on restoring family links, was focused on reuniting people who were still alive, searching for separated family members who were still alive. After the 1990s, we realized that unfortunately many of those are dead, and we have to work on reuniting families with the remains of their loved ones. So in 2002, the ICRC launched the Missing Initiative. This included 8 workshops and 3 studies, bringing together experts from around the world to discuss a number of issues related to missing persons. This culminated in February of 2003 with an experts conference held in Geneva, where all of the experts were brought together and their recommendations were consolidated into a single set of missing guidelines. And these guidelines are available on the ICRC's website. These experts came together and said, these are the minimum standards, these are standards of best practice that should be maintained globally. And in December of 2003, the missing guidelines were officially adopted at the 28th International Conference of the Red Cross and Red Crescent. And it's very important to note that the International Conference of the Red Cross and Red Crescent includes the ICRC, the Federation, all the national societies, and every state that is a party to the Geneva Conventions, which is all recognized states. The Geneva Conventions are the only piece of international legislation which are universal, meaning all states have agreed to them. So it's very significant that all countries came together in December of 2003 and agreed that these guidelines should be adhered to globally. Each country also made commitments to bring their standards within their countries up to these minimum guidelines. And the work is still progressing around the world. Some of the recommendations resulting from the conference include advice and guidelines on forensic best practice for the recovery, management, and identification of the dead in war-torn and challenging contexts, including roles, duties, responsibilities, and applicable ethical standards for forensic practitioners and teams, guidelines for the recovery and storage of human remains, criteria for forensic human identification, principles for ethical, effective, and efficient information management, and advice on the relationship between forensic practitioners and bereaved families and communities. And I think this last point is very important. Our families and communities have to be involved into the forensic process. They have to understand what's going on so that they can feel that they are a part of the process to bring the remains of their missing loved ones home, and so that they feel fully informed and that the process is transparent for them. Now, the recommendations from the conference span much more than just this. It includes a lot of legal issues, a broad range of issues. These are some that are more relevant to us as forensic practitioners. Also recommended through this conference was that the ICRC create a forensic unit within the institution itself. And in 2004, our first forensic expert was hired at the ICRC, and we were very fortunate to have Professor Cordner spend 1 year with us while he was on sabbatical. He was our first forensic coordinator for the ICRC. As of 2010, we have 7 professional staff, 1 intern, and 1 long-term consultant, plus a worldwide network of consultants to help us. It's very important to note also that of our 9-member staff, about half are from the economic south, so to speak. So I think we're very representative in our staff members. Our worldwide network of consultants is extremely important to us. Since we are only 9 members, of course, we can't respond ourselves to all situations. We're very fortunate to know a number of experts around the world that we can send in our place, and we're very fortunate to hold memoranda of understanding with a number of organizations, including the Victorian Institute of Forensic Medicine. In 2004, the ICRC was operating only in 3 operational contexts. The forensic unit, was operating in only 3 operational contexts. In 2010, we're active in more than 50 operational contexts. And over the last 7 years, we've carried out more than 300 missions. This is an extremely conservative estimate. My guess is it's more around 600 missions between all 9 staff members. The core components of the work of the forensic services of the ICRC include operational support, meaning providing direct support to our own offices around the globe. Promotion of scientific best practices, not only to our own staff, but with the people we work with in country, the local authorities and local practitioners. Creation of tools, such as forms for the collection of antemortem data and postmortem data, as well as an IT tool to manage that information. Setting guidelines and standards with the help of experts around the world. Providing training and increasing our networking capabilities, and also establishing networks among you, not just between you and the ICRC, but between the organizations themselves. And in exceptional circumstances, we do carry out forensic casework, but that's very exceptional. Now, what does the forensic unit do? Well, as I mentioned, we were created as a direct result of the Missing Conference. So you see missing at the bottom of this triangle, that is the foundation of the creation of the unit. But starting from 2008, we have become much more involved in disasters, and starting just from 2010, our work in other situations of violence has grown considerably. The work on the missing is conflict-related missing. I'm sure you're very much familiar with the Balkans. You've heard quite a lot. Professor Cordner spoke about the Balkans. The ICRC has been actively involved in the Balkans. We had a presence there since before the conflict. We've also helped local authorities in Peru, Iraq, and a number of other countries around the world. Our work in disasters has included a number of countries: Chile, Haiti, Myanmar. The list is growing all the time. I think in 2010 we've already been involved in over 4 disaster situations. And the type of assistance that we can provide in disaster situations ranges all the way from simply providing equipment like body bags and nothing else to the authorities, providing training for first responders on the collection of dead bodies, the proper management of human remains, all the way up to doing it ourselves if we are asked to do so and in exceptional circumstances. Excuse me. For the sake of time, I'm going to move forward. Our work in other situations of violence spans a number of different topics. We've worked in a number of contexts already. To give you one example of the type of work that we're doing, in Mexico, the local authorities are very keen to work with the ICRC on addressing the issue of unidentified remains. These are remains not exactly related to armed conflict in the classic sense, or even from disasters, but from other situations of violence, including human trafficking, drug trafficking, gang violence, and very importantly, migration across borders, north and south. This has become a huge issue in Mexico. Tens of thousands of unidentified bodies end up in medical legal facilities in Mexico each year. and the system is a bit overwhelmed. So the ICRC is trying to work with the Mexican authorities to see how we can approach this issue. But of course we have to start at the very bottom. So what is the contribution of forensic science to the search for the missing? Well, recovery and identification of the dead, with which we're all familiar. Documentation of events, this can be very important. Setting the historical record straight to accurately document what actually happened so that it doesn't become a one-sided history. Accountability for those guilty of crimes and justice. Reparations to families and communities, and some would argue that forensic science can help with the prevention of repetition. Unfortunately, I think this is still a hope. I don't know that any any acts have been stopped because we've documented previous acts, but we can still hope. It's also very important to note that Interpol noted by the Interpol General Assembly in 1996 recognized the basic human right of all individuals to be properly identified after death. Unfortunately, when required standards are not respected, as you can see in these two images, these are from Argentina in 1984 when democracy was restored to the country. There were over 10,000 missing at that time due to enforced disappearance. And when democracy was restored, there was a rush to get into the graves of unidentified bodies. Many of the bodies, people knew where they were, they just didn't know who they were. So there was a big rush to come in and conduct exhumations. Unfortunately, the exhumations were done very poorly, and you can see here just piles of bones. All the bones were just lifted up out of the ground and piled together. And this is an absolute disaster following the disaster. It is highly unlikely that these bones will ever be separated out again into individuals. So this is we've lost all the evidence, and it's unlikely that a lot of these people will be identified. Remember also this was 1984. What is particularly troubling in this photo, the woman you see on the right-hand side of the photo, she was an esteemed clinical psychologist in Argentina. She was brought to the site and told that her daughter was probably lying among those remains. And 25 years later, she's still searching for her daughter. So what are the characteristics of forensic investigations into the missing? Unfortunately, there's often a very unclear legal framework or legal setting in which to operate. Also, it can become tricky to try to reconcile the investigation of serious crimes with the plight of the bereaved, to know the fate of their loved ones, and often we have to operate in challenging environments. So you see how when we talk about investigating the missing, whether it's a disaster situation or a conflict situation, the normal practices, the normal frameworks that exist within a country often become blurred or simply non-existent, which Stephen spoke about just a while ago, spoke very well about. So we want to make sure we ensure a clear framework, and this includes applying applicable norms, regulations, and procedures, making sure that duties and responsibilities are clear among all people taking part, including the use of proper guidelines and standard operating procedures. Quality control and assurance is very important. We have to audit ourselves and make sure that the work that we're doing is of highest quality, because we are accountable not only to the families but also to our own professions. And transparency towards the bereaved is very important, and especially the ICRC the foundation of the ICRC's work on the missing is the families. Frameworks for death investigation. Several frameworks have to be taken into consideration when we undertake this kind of work. There are the normative and legal frameworks, including what is the purpose of the investigation, jurisdiction, institutional frameworks, to which institution is a forensic practitioner responsible, as well as operational frameworks, which methods of identification will be employed, and what criteria will be used to establish minimum requirements to establish positive identification. And of course, this can only be decided in the local context. No one can come in and force authorities to decide that only these requirements will be acceptable for an identification. Those have to be decided within the local context. But we do try to promote a minimum standards. It's important to note that when we talk about frameworks for death investigation, you can see here legitimacy is very important. We have to make sure that what we're trying to do is accepted by the authorities, by the forensic practitioners, by the families, and even by the international community. Once we have legitimacy, we can move up to legality, issues of security, ensuring that we have the proper resources to carry out the operation correctly, coordination, and then finally at the very tip top is the actual forensic operation. And we feel very strongly that this pyramid is essential and it must be a bottom-heavy pyramid. The forensic operation is a very small component. Without a strong base of legitimacy and legality, the forensic operation is much less useful. So what are some of the trends that we've seen since the 1980s when the missing were first recognized to probably be dead? Well, there's been increased awareness of the needs and rights of the bereaved, and the families of the missing have become more of a central focus of addressing the issue of unidentified remains and missing persons. The needs of the families, those are very much the rights of the families, the right to know. But the needs of the families have also come into highlight. And those include psychosocial needs, socioeconomic needs, and legal needs, coordination of families in the identification process, or including them so they understand what's going on. We've also seen a shift in paradigms. As Stephen mentioned, rather than focusing only on cause and manner of death, which was usually the case prior to a couple of decades ago, we now see how important it is that remains are identified, and we have moved more towards humanitarian identifications. As a response to this, there has been a growing worldwide increase of attention to the issue of the missing. A number of organizations have become involved in this work globally, all the way from intergovernmental organizations like the UN to non-governmental organizations and humanitarian organizations like the ICRC. It's very good that there has been increased attention to this issue worldwide by these large organizations, but at the same time, with so many cooks in the kitchen, sometimes things can be a little uncoordinated. And that's something we have to aim towards also, is coordinating our efforts so that the same actions are not duplicated while other needs are ignored. So what have these trends resulted in? Well, there have been growing expectations and demands from the families. Families have become more vocal, they're more aware of their right to know, and they are more verbal about insisting that they are a part of the activities, that they receive reparations or compensation, that justice and accountability is not forgotten, and that they are recognized by society and their own authorities. So what is the ICRC's general strategic goal when it comes to addressing the issue of missing persons, be they conflict-related or as a result of disasters and catastrophes? We believe that local ownership and local capacity equal sustainability. We try to work with local authorities to remind the authorities of their obligations under international humanitarian law to address the rights of families to know the fate of their loved ones. We work to identify legal gaps and assist with legal reform. We try to establish fora whenever possible for the confidential exchange of information. This is particularly important in conflict situations where you have two clear parties that do have information about missing persons from the other side, but they're afraid to share it. So we can help to establish confidential fora for the exchange of that information. We can help to identify deficiencies in local standards and assist with their improvement and assess the needs of families. I'm running low on time, so I'm going to go quickly through some of the examples of things that we're doing. In Nepal, we've been involved with the local authorities quite a bit on a number of issues. One of those is trying to push the authorities to adopt a bill on disappearances to address the many thousands, the many missing persons. In India, we have worked with the National Disaster Management Authority, who has created guidelines on the management of the dead in the aftermath of disasters. And I won't speak much about this because we're very fortunate to have Dr. Sachdeva come this morning and speak about the National Disaster Management Authority and these guidelines. In April, in coordination with the Victorian Institute of Forensic Medicine and ASEAN, a workshop was held in Jakarta, bringing together 9 of the 10 members of ASEAN, 9 of the 10 member countries of ASEAN, on a workshop of human remains management and disaster victim identification following catastrophes. This was, I think, a very successful workshop, and I hope to see follow-up from this workshop. And I would also propose that SAARC countries consider a similar initiative. As well as local ownership, there must be local capacity. The ICRC works with local professionals to provide specialized training as needed. And when I talk about specialized training, you're all experts in your own fields. We fully recognize that. When you're talking of missing persons, either following disasters or from catastrophes, we're talking about large numbers of unidentified remains, often skeletonized remains, which requires a very different strategy to address those unidentified remains than your normal day-to-day work. So we do try to provide specialized training to address these special circumstances when needed. Providing equipment, small-scale support in form of equipment, and also tools, including the forums that I mentioned and the IT tool, to establish and promote regional networks of professionals and institutions, to foster communication and cooperation across disciplines within a single country. One example of that is trying to get archaeologists on board in a number of countries. Many countries don't normally employ forensic archaeologists or archaeologists who can be trained in forensic archaeology. So that's something we try to bring on board in a number of countries. To identify existing resources that can assist either directly or to help build local capacity. And just a couple of examples. In Nepal, the ICRC has been working with the local forensic practitioners, the Ministry of Peace and Reconciliation, and some other international organizations to provide this specialized training on exhumation and identification. In India, Pakistan, perhaps Bangladesh next year, will be providing training on disaster victim identification, both in-country and at our headquarters in Geneva, Switzerland. Some of the tools that I mentioned that the ICRC has been involved in creating to assist with responding to disaster situations are the Manual on Management of the Dead after Disasters, as Stephen mentioned. This has been both officially and unofficially translated into a number of local languages worldwide. Here you see the Chinese version. If you're interested in a version in your own language, I encourage you to contact the ICRC delegation nearest you, which is probably in the capital of your country. If the delegation has not already translated into the local language, establish a dialogue with them and ask them to do so. This is done around the world, and we very much encourage you to come forward and ask for a local translation. Training provided in-country. Here you can see an example of training that we provided on the spot for a number of countries on disaster victim identification. We also hold annually a course at our training center just outside of Geneva on management of the dead from armed conflicts and catastrophes. This is a week-long course, and it is very comprehensive. And some have stated that it's the most comprehensive course on disaster victim identification out there. It's been very well received so far. We've held one annually for the last 3 years. We had so many people trying to register for the one this year that next year we're going to hold 2, one in April and one in November. If you're interested in participating, get in touch with your local ICRC office. The database, as I mentioned, I won't speak too much about this. This is one project in particular that I'm interested in, since I'm the focal person for it, and I'd love to tell you more about it. But let me just state that it is a comprehensive database for storing, archiving, and analyzing antemortem and postmortem information. There are a number of functionalities within the database to assist with the identification process, including an automated matching tool of non-DNA data. It looks at information on the AM side and the PM side, basic information such as age, sex, stature, medical details, dental details, and looks for possible matches between the two. This is automated within the database. You just set a couple of parameters, hit search, and it does it on its own. So sustainability. Why is sustainability important? Well, it ensures a long-term presence of expertise. It's very easy for the international community to come into your countries and say, oh, hey, we're here to help. And that's great. Everyone appreciates help. But addressing the issue of the missing is a long-term commitment. Even in Bosnia, where we have had the largest international operation, the most expensive international operation in history, millions of dollars poured into addressing the issue of the missing. There are still nearly half of the missing are unidentified, and this is 15 years after the end of the conflict. Addressing the issue of the missing is a long-term commitment, and often the international community simply cannot remain in a context when we get into spans of time like decades. So it's local expertise that is very important. Local expertise ensures a long-term presence. It also ensures capacity in case of recurrence. This is very important in the situation of disasters, especially in this region, which is very prone to natural disasters. Unfortunately, we know that they're not one-time events. So we hope that if they occur, and we hope they don't, but if they recur in your country, because you already have the expertise established, you will be able to better handle the next disaster. It also empowers local institutions in all of their efforts, be it their daily activities up to working internationally in other contexts. Unfortunately, from our perspective, we have to keep in mind our own opportunities and constraints. Most importantly is the fact that we have a headquarters in Geneva and offices in a number of countries, but the offices are largely autonomous, and they do not take their directives from Geneva exactly. This is good because it allows us to contextualize for a specific context. You don't need to do the exact same thing in every country. Each country has its own needs. On the other hand, it does make it difficult to share resources and share lessons learned from one country to another because we are a bit decentralized. So a few proposals for addressing the issue of missing persons and disaster victim identification in this region. We propose that we should continue building communication, coordination, and cooperation between forensic practitioners and institutions from the Asia-Pacific region. One way this can happen is a second meeting of Asia-Pacific regional medical legal institutes next year. We held the first regional meeting in 2008 in Melbourne, and we would like to see another one. But that means someone has to agree to host it. Any takers? Indonesia? Oh, are you volunteering? India? Well, we think it's very important that a next Asia-Pacific meeting take place to bring together practitioners and institutions. Not really to have another scientific meeting. INPALMS is quite successful at providing a scientific forum, but to bring together institutions to identify needs in the region and to identify ways that your institutions as a regional network can work together to fill gaps. We also believe that improved opportunities for regional forensic practitioners and institutions in regional fora is very important. For example, ASEAN, the conference that I mentioned in April in Jakarta, and hopefully the SAARC countries may take that on board as well. We'd like to enhance training opportunities in the region, by the region, including of training of trainer opportunities. And by this, I mean we would like to see more training across countries right here in the region and by the region. Not someone coming from Switzerland to provide training, but let's say someone from India providing training in Nepal. So keep it in the region, by the region. And we'd also like to see improved opportunities for regional practitioners to participate in international meetings, such as the International Association of Forensic Science, which will hold their meeting in September of next year in Madeira, Portugal, the International Association of Legal Medicine in 2012, and the next INPALM meetings in Kuala Lumpur in 2013. So these are some of the proposals that the ICRC puts forth for all of you to think about. I hope you will take these into consideration, and I hope you will think of others for us to discuss at the round table this afternoon. Thank you very much.